You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Warwicker with The World Today. And also coming up later this hour, the role China's pandas have played over the years in the country's diplomacy.
I am pleased to be here and accept the precious gift of the pandas, and also these other mementos from the government of the People's Republic of China. And I do appreciate them taking such good care of the pandas on the long trip and after they arrived here at their new home.
More on pandas to come. I'm joined throughout the programme, as you heard, by two guests. Nabila Ramdani is here. She's a Paris-born freelance journalist of Algerian descent, specialises in Islamic affairs and the Arab world. The French connection continues with Simon Cooper, who's on the line from Paris. This morning he's a columnist for the Financial Times and an author of a number of books on football. Nabila, Simon, welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Good to have you on the programme. Simon, I just wanted to ask you about the fact that you're British, your wife is American, so what prompted the move to Paris and when did it happen?
I was a real estate refugee from London. About 10 years ago I bought an apartment in Paris. At the time it cost very little and I never intended to live here, and I tried living in Paris for a spring and I've never been back. It's 10 years now. Right,
and as a result of living there and bringing up 3 children there, I know we will talk about your book, rest assured, a little later on, but your wife has written a book about French mothers?
Yes, she's just written a book called French Children Don't Throw Food, as it's called in the UK, and it's out there now, and a lot of Brits are complaining that they're being told all the time that the French do everything better, but having lived here for 10 years I can say the French do most things better, and that includes child rearing. So sitting in the playground, which I spend a lot of my life doing, you don't actually see that many badly behaved, obese children throwing tantrums here.
Nabila, you're raising an eyebrow. You were Paris-born. Does that chime with your experience?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'll have different views than Simon on raising children, because my mother happens to be a school teacher and she has quite horrific stories about how teachers go about smacking children. And I know French laws are much more flexible than British laws in that regard.
So maybe, Simon, that's part of the story.
They used to smack, but like in most European countries, that is now frowned upon and done much, much less than before. I mean, France really changed very significantly in the 70s in that regard, and there is more strictness, more discipline, a little bit more of the children should be seen and not heard, but I think on the whole they get the balance about right nowadays.
Nabila, just with your Paris connection, I understand, and this is in connection to the fact that you're going to visit the author Charles Dickens' old family home, I think, to celebrate his 200th birthday next month. Your favourite book, therefore, has to be A Tale of Two Cities.
Yes, absolutely. Since my life is in fact set between these two cities. I'm London-based mainly, but I do travel back and forth to Paris. This book very much sums up the state of my life at the moment. And of course, the opening line, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, is certainly, one of Dickens's best.
Plenty more to come then from Simon and Nabila throughout the programme. If you want to get in touch, of course you can via email, worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. Worldhaveyoursay is all one word. You can send an SMS message to us via your mobile phone. The number for that is 447786 20 60 80. We begin in news terms in Nigeria, where the organisers of an anti-government rally set for Saturday in the commercial capital Lagos have called off the event following Friday's bomb attacks in the north of the country. The attacks on police stations and other government facilities in Kano killed at least 6 people. This man witnessed one of the explosions.
I saw a dead body, a young man who was lying dead, and then I proceeded further towards the immigration office. That was where the very first bomb blast started, in front of the gate, and then there were several deaths. There were 3 dead bodies right there in front of the immigration office.
Well, our correspondent Mark Lobel is in Lagos. What have the organisers of the rally been saying?
In the lead up to this rally, there was always a lot of tension between the organisers and the police and the army here. On Wednesday, we saw that a very, very peaceful protest was tear-gassed, including old professors and lawyers taking part in that protest. So there was simply no need for the tear gas there. The army have been occupying their protest site for a while, so they were always worried about what the state's reaction would be. They then heard last night that militants had apparently infiltrated the group and were going to come along and cause a lot of mayhem. So we're already at a heightened state of alert. But when these attacks happened, what they described as unprecedented terror attacks in Kano, they also thought they couldn't be seen to be stretching the state's resources any further, and so they called it off for the time being.
And what was the demonstration specifically going to be about?
Well, this is an incredibly new movement in Nigeria, which has almost sprung up because of the confidence of protesters to go out onto the streets because of the fuel subsidy deal. But their issues are not about the fuel subsidy specifically. This is more a civil action group that are saying that several things have to happen. There needs to be a change in the way that the country is run, and also there needs to be an end to this military presence in the commercial capital, Lagos. Specifically in terms of the way the country should run, they want an end to corruption. They want more accountability for their politicians. They really want a national conference called in order to discuss all these things as a starting point, and that's really what they would have been campaigning for today.
Let's turn our attention to events in Kano. What's the latest from there?
Well, this is a shocking series of attacks, as you were just outlining there, in which the city was really under siege for about 2 hours. Gunfire was firing out. There was smoke billowing across this very ancient city. What we do know now is that Boko Haram, who have claimed responsibility, may have done so because about a month ago there was an attack there in which several Boko Haram members were killed following their fatal attacks on Air Force officers and policemen. And they have repeatedly been asking for political prisoners, because about 14 people were arrested in that attack, to be released. And of course authorities have not, they have refused to release these people arrested last month. And so Boko Haram were threatening that they would attack the city in this way, and it seems that that's exactly what they've done.
That was Mark Lobel in Lagos, initially on the cancellation of that anti-government rally, and then on the latest on events in the north of the country, specifically the bomb attacks in Kano. And Nabila, it does seem that the authorities in Nigeria are struggling to counter what Boko Haram are fairly consistently doing just now.
Yes, absolutely. I think it has to be said that Boko Haram really became more visible since 2009, because it came to the fore with sectarian tensions in Nigeria opposing Christians and Muslims, and since then they've increased their attacks on Christian communities in particular, and they're always after great PR coups like targeting churches on Christmas Day, which is a horrific thing to do, really. And it's an increasing problem, not only for Nigeria but also in the region, because Boko Haram has, of course, links with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, but also with Somali radical groups like Al-Shabaab.
I'm just reading actually a wire report of further explosions actually in Nigeria. This being reported by AFP that 2 explosions have rocked the city of Yenagoa, and that's in the home state of the president, Goodluck Jonathan. No casualties reported. This according to the governor's office and the military. So the violence continuing, and as you say, very hard for the authorities to deal with it in any meaningful fashion.
Yes, absolutely. Especially since I think Boko Haram's agenda is wider than the political agenda of Nigeria. It has very much an anti-Western stance as well, which, makes their claims more vague, as it were, but also the way they act more violent.
Simon Cooper, thoughts on this from Paris, perhaps?
I think it's very sad that Nigeria might be derailed at this otherwise quite optimistic point. I mean, democracy is getting back on a more stable footing, the economy has been improving slightly, and that's the story of many African countries in the last few years. The rise of the mobile phone has helped, the rise in commodity prices, and so it would be tragic if Africa's largest country, sub-Saharan Africa's largest country, fell into chaos as a result of this.
And I suppose actually an illustration of that, I mean, yes, this anti-government rally has been cancelled for the reasons that we were talking about, but actually some of the aims it initially had about the military presence in Lagos, about corruption, is born, certainly according to Mark Lobel, out of a confidence that now you can take to the streets and you can protest about that kind of political activity.
Yes, and absolutely, and it reminds you of Russia, the demonstrations against Putin in Russia in recent weeks. Which, of course, also all these things in turn are inspired by the Arab Spring, which began a year ago. And you tend to get this when you reach a certain level of income, when you have enough people who can worry about more than bare subsistence, you tend to get these demands for more democracy, less corruption.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Warwicker with The World Today, and a reminder of our main stories. A curfew has been imposed in the Nigerian city of Kano after coordinated bomb attacks on police stations and government facilities. The United Nations has warned that more than 120,000 people need help in South Sudan as a result of weeks of tribal fighting. And scientists have suspended attempts to modify the bird flu virus for fear that their work might be used by terrorists. The small West African countries of Equatorial Guinea and Gabon are hardly two of the best-known footballing nations on the African continent, but from today they take centre stage. They're jointly hosting its premier football tournament, the Africa Cup of Nations. And as Alex Capstick reports from Bata in Equatorial Guinea, it's not only the footballing prowess of the hosts that's proving controversial.
Workmen applying the finishing touches to the stadium in Bata, a world-class facility in a country which has never before appeared in, let alone staged, the African Cup of Nations. Equatorial Guinea, like its co-host Gabon, is one of sub-Saharan Africa's major oil producers. It's why the government could afford to bid for the tournament. Its tarnished reputation over human rights issues, corruption and freedom of speech was not considered when the application was accepted. These men have come together in a typical local bar. They want to talk about their favourite sport, football, and in particular the chances of Equatorial Guinea, with the lowly world ranking of 151, doing well at the Cup of Nations.
Very proud of my country. Up to now, what we have done so far, I'm proud and everybody is excited.
This is such a small country, though. A lot of people think it's an odd choice to stage such a big event, such a prestigious event as the Cup of Nations.
Yeah, there is no problem with the size of the country. I mean, there is a lot of people and parts of the world which they have never heard about it because of the size. So I think this is going to be a good opportunity for a lot of people to know about EG, to see on TV and what it looks like. I think it's good.
A glimpse of the final rehearsal for the opening ceremony suggests the tournament will get off to a slick and colourful start. But some people have already ridiculed the 28th edition of the Cup of Nations for the teams that didn't qualify. They included such heavyweights as Nigeria, Cameroon and Egypt. But the head of the Ghanaian Football Federation, Kwesi Nyantakyi, said that was unfair.
All these countries you're talking about countries with good pedigree in this competition. But at this material moment, they are not the best. That's why they didn't qualify. Those that are the best are the teams that qualified in their place, and we should accord them the necessary respect.
It was a great achievement for the likes of Niger, Botswana and especially Libya to qualify. But Mr Nyantakyi knows the firm favourites for the title are his own Ghana, who haven't won the trophy in 30 years, and Ivory Coast, which can boast a squad brimming with European-based stars. So far, it's been a challenge for the organisers. It's nearly time for the players to get their turn.
Alex Capstick reporting, and if you're able to stay with us in an hour's time, Ian Birrell, who's co-founder of Africa Express, which brings together African and Western musicians, will be here talking about a recent visit that he made to Equatorial Guinea, when we will inevitably concentrate on the human rights record of the country. But let's look more at the footballing aspect of this tournament with you, Simon. Prospects for what lies ahead over the coming weeks, purely in footballing terms, first of all.
Well, Ivory Coast will be a contender, and Didier Drogba, I think, probably playing his last big tournament. Ivory Coast have always underperformed given their talent. And Morocco are sort of quietly hopeful. Like a lot of African teams, they draw their squad largely from European people of Moroccan descent, Moroccans who grew up in Holland or Belgium or France. And because European football at the moment is better than African football, that tends to be an advantage. So they're very hopeful that with a lot of the traditional rivals gone, they can come up. I myself will be particularly curious about Botswana. I remember very clearly sitting in the grass on the touchline as a journalist 20 years ago, watching Botswana and Niger. I think Niger are also there. And it really was like being at an amateur game. I mean, I was, I think, the only journalist there pretty much. And they said, OK, you can sit on the grass. And so I was a yard from the play, and to think that these teams are now at the African Nations Cup is quite a thrill.
Alex made reference to the absence of some of what you would regard as the big name countries. Is that to the tournament's detriment in your mind, or is it a chance for others to show that actually they are up there amongst the best now themselves?
I mean, if you're a country like Libya or Botswana, this is just hugely exciting, whereas if you're Nigeria, you would tend to be a bit blasé about African Nations Cups. And I know that Nigerians often, as they watch in their pubs, and you pay money to get into the pub, and you watch on a big screen, they're much more excited about the Premier League, and a game like Liverpool-Chelsea is a big enough deal in Nigeria for national TV news to be moved, whereas the African Nations Cup they're less excited about. So I think for the small nations, this is their chance, this is their moment. And the bigger nations, I mean, African Nations Cups come around with great frequency once every 2 years, so I think they'll be back one day.
Nabila, will you be following this closely?
Well, I have to say that I'm a bit disappointed that Algeria, of course, hasn't qualified this year, because I would have been supporting Algeria otherwise. But Simon said, hugely excited for other nations, like Libya in particular, where the Africa Cup will be a very nice and indeed unifying distraction from recent tragedy at home. It comes with, of course, it's a new team, new colours, a new nickname, the Mediterranean Knights, a new anthem, a new flag, and they even have soldiers, rebel soldiers among, former rebel soldiers among the team who will be playing as well. So hugely exciting for Libya, a bit of a fairy tale story, really.
Mm. Simon, if you are hosting this, and in this case it is Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, how much does that potentially do for those countries?
Nothing. I mean, countries
Really?
always talk the talk about hosting, that we're building all this infrastructure that will be useful in years to come. Well, mostly it's stuff that isn't very useful, because you build this smart international stadium or several smart international stadiums and access roads to them and an airport in a small town to field all the hopeful tourists who usually don't arrive. And then a year later, I mean, as you see now in South Africa, these things tend to become white elephants. I mean, this is government spending. And so it's money that they should be spending, particularly in these very, very poor countries, on schools, on hospitals, on the most basic things the population needs. They don't need large, swish football stadiums.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I would say that the hotels apparently are not that smart, because there are many stories, in fact, about hotels welcoming the various football teams lacking water, for example, or having, their kitchens and their restaurants invaded by rodents. So that's very worrying as well. And the Libyan team, for example, has flown out there with their own chef because they don't. Because of lack of staff and lack of services available out there.
Yeah, I mean, you need the infrastructure for the tournament. You need smart hotels and new stadiums for the tournament, but the tournament lasts about 3 weeks. And, although Equatorial Guinea has quite a high income per capita, if you average it out per person, it's about $15,000. Most people there are living on about $1 a day, and they really need other things. And it's really a disgrace that, as the government was saying earlier in this program, that they make these claims about how this will boost the economy. It really doesn't. I mean, it's their own money that the country spends to produce these things.
Very interesting thoughts, as I say. In the next hour, if you're able to stay with us, we will talk again about the Africa Cup of Nations with particular reference to Equatorial Guinea and its bleak human rights record, not just against, according to one organisation, but according to several organisations. Ian Birrell will be here, co-founder of Africa Express, bringing together African and Western musicians, and he went there with a group of British parliamentarians within the last few months and had some very interesting things to say about what he saw and who he spoke to. So what's happening elsewhere in the world of sport? Seth Bennett is here to tell us. Seth.
Thank you, Julian. Well, a number of English Premier League teams are actually counting the cost of losing some of their better players to international duty, but of the 368 players competing in Gabon and Equatorial Guinea, only 13 play in the Premier League and 14 clubs are completely unaffected. Chelsea are going to be without Didier Drogba and Solomon Kalou for their trip to Norwich. With the other four sides in the top five not in action until Sunday, though, Chelsea can move within 3 points of third-place Tottenham with a win. New signing Gary Cahill could make his debut, but is most likely to be a substitute.
I just prepare as if I am going to play. If I am, fantastic. If not, it's just important for me to work hard to try and get into this team, because there's some fantastic players here.
How difficult do you think that's going to be to get yourself a regular spot in the team?
The standard of players at this club is obviously phenomenal, world-class international players. So, yeah, first of all, my aim is obviously to work hard in training, and if given the opportunity to keep hold of the shirt. So I'm under no illusions that it's going to be difficult to get in there, but like I said, once I get in there, hopefully I'll try and bed my position down and keep hold of the shirt.
Elsewhere, the Newcastle trio, Cheick Tioté, Demba Ba and new signing Papi Cissé will miss the match against Fulham because of their participation in the competition. And David Hocnkey is poised to face his former club for the first time since his move from Liverpool to Bolton at the end of last season. Queen's Park Rangers host fellow strugglers Wigan, and it's new manager Mark Hughes' first home Premier League game.
We're all mindful of the significance of the game, not only this one, but maybe this next 6, 7, 8 games. They're key to how our season will progress, and I'm certain if we can get a positive result at the weekend, then that will sustain us for the games that we have ahead of us.
In the other games, Everton host Blackburn, Stoke City are at home to West Brom, Sunderland face Swansea and Aston Villa travel to Wolves. Plenty of action on day 6 of the Australian Open and few problems for the big names as the world number 1 Novak Djokovic and Joe-Wilfried Tsonga both went through in straight sets. Djokovic beat Nicolas Mahut in straight sets 6-0, 6-love, 6-1, 6-1. Tsonga needed just 91 minutes to beat Portugal's Frederico Gil, and he feels he's improving with every match he plays.
Every year and every tournament it's a bit the same story for me. I play better and better every match, and today I played well and didn't spend a lot of time in court, and it's good for the rest of the tournament, and anyway I'm confident.
There are also wins for Spain's David Ferrer and Richard Gasquet of France. The Wimbledon champion Petra Kvitova advanced earlier after her opponent Maria Kirilenko retired because of an injury from their match. 6-love, 1-love was the score at the time, and Kvitova says she feels like she's in very good form.
When I played the first 5 games was great, and I mean, yeah, from the last match that I played was really big difference, and I'm really happy how I played today, and hopefully it will be continue like this.
And of course there is plenty more coverage via our website, bbcworldservice.com.
Seth, thank you very much. Seth Bennett with your sports news. A reminder that I have 2 guests with me throughout today's programme. Nabila Ramdani here in London, Simon Cooper in Paris. If you have any thoughts on anything you hear from either of them, we'll have your say at bbc.com, and plenty more to come from them both in the second half of the programme. You're listening to The World Today from the BBC World Service.
BBC.
Incredible stories.
I was taken to a barrack where all the girls my age, we were like experimented on.
From incredible times.
I went through extreme hardship, as I went through extreme hell.
Told by those who survived them.
Life is so precious, and I wanted to live.
The BBC meets the Holocaust survivors, hoping their stories will live on after them.
I spoke to my whole family there until 4 o'clock in the morning, telling my whole story.
Survivor Stories, online from the 28th of January at bbcworldservice.com.
Hello, this is Lee James. Join me today for Sports World. We'll be live in Equatorial Guinea and Gabon on the opening day of the 2012 Africa Cup of Nations. And there's live Premier League commentary as QPR face Wigan.
It's 7:30 GMT. This is The World Today from the BBC World Service. Still to come, a psychologist's view of the behaviour of the captain of the stricken cruise liner in Italy. The panda as a diplomatic gift, how it's worked for China over the years, and how the artist David Hocnkey has returned to his roots. That's all here on The World Today with me, Julian Warwick. Now the latest world news.
BBC News with Stuart McIntosh. The organisers of a big anti-government rally planned to take place today in Nigeria's largest city, Lagos, have cancelled the event. Their decision was in response to coordinated bomb attacks on Friday in the northern city of Kano, which killed at least 6 people. The militant Islamist group Boko Haram said it was responsible. Scientists at leading bird flu laboratories who created a more easily transmitted strain of the disease have agreed to suspend their research for 2 months over fears it could be used by terrorists. The researchers called for an international forum to debate the risks and benefits. The British government is increasing funding to fight what are known as the neglected tropical diseases. It's part of a global push to bring more attention to diseases such as river blindness, elephantiasis and guinea worm. The Cuban government has defended its treatment of a political dissident who died on Thursday after 2 months on hunger strike in jail. Officials said the prisoner, Wilman Villa, was admitted to hospital from prison a week ago, and they listed a wide range of medical treatment he had been given. Officials in Washington say the United States is considering closing its embassy in Damascus because of increasing safety concerns, but they said no final decision had been taken. American Republican Party candidates are fighting it out today in South Carolina in the third of a series of presidential primary elections. The favourite for the candidacy, Mitt Romney, a Mormon, is facing his first vote in a conservative southern state made up largely of evangelicals who don't recognise his church as part of Christianity. Africa's premier football tournament, the Cup of Nations, gets underway later today with the hosting shared between 2 small Western African countries, Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. Both hope the event will raise their international profiles and cement their links with the rest of Africa. That's the latest BBC News.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Warwicker with The World Today. Throughout the programme, I have 2 guests with me. Nabila Ramdani is a Paris-born freelance journalist of Algerian descent who specialises in Islamic affairs and the Arab world. Simon Cooper is a columnist for the Financial Times and author of a number of books on football. He's on the line from Paris. Now, the company operating the Costa Concordia, which ran aground off Italy last week, is facing a lawsuit in the United States. Italy's Consumer Association, Codacons, and 2 US law firms told the BBC they would file the suit against Costa Cruises on behalf of the passengers. They want at least $160,000 for each passenger on the ship. At least 11 people died in the accident, with 21 still missing. Well, earlier in the week, you may recall hearing the recording of the very heated communications between the Coast Guard and the panicked-sounding captain of the cruise ship, Francesco Schettino. The exchange took place sometime after the ship had run aground, as the evacuation of passengers was still taking place. In this extract, you can hear the Coast Guard trying to convince the reluctant captain to return on board the ship to help the passengers.
Get on board. That's an order. You need to continue the rescue. Get going. There are already corpses, Schettino. Move!
How many dead are there?
I don't know. One I'm aware of, one I've heard of. You need to be telling me this.
But are you aware it's dark and we can't see anything?
And what do you want? To go back home, Schettino? It's dark and you want to go back home? Get onto the bow of the ship and tell me what can be done. How many people there are and what do they need? Now!
Well, the captain has been widely criticised for his actions during the emergency. There was outrage in Italy at his apparent claim to have fallen into a lifeboat. Some newspapers have called him Captain Coward. Well, Cynthia Puri is a professor of psychology at Clemson University in the United States. Her research focuses on courage and character. She's been mulling over the events on the ship. What can she tell us about the captain's response to the accident?
Last week, a cruise ship captain refused to reboard his capsized ship to help rescue passengers. This has been interpreted as a lack of courage. One common assumption about courage is that it's the opposite of fear. An opposing view is that courage is instead only truly present when one experiences fear but acts despite it. Neither is completely true. Instead, research shows that a sense of personal risk, rather than fear itself, is the required element. This sense of risk might not always lead to fear, but when it does, that fear can lead to avoidance, escape, and impaired decision-making. Perhaps this is one reason why keeping calm under pressure is so highly valued. I asked participants in my research to tell me anything they've done or said to themselves in the past that's helped them to act more courageously. A typical response is to try to minimize their sense of personal risk or simply to calm themselves down. Another common response is to think very carefully about the actions they're about to take and rehearse what they're going to do or say. The most frequent response, however, is to focus away from the personal risk and onto the value of the goal that they're trying to accomplish. A lot of people report this as a duty or an obligation. The person reminds themselves of their own personal responsibility to take action. In the case of professions that demand courage, this last part is typically right in the job description. Firefighters, military personnel, and police officers are expected to behave with physical courage as an expected and maybe even routine part of their job duties. This duty-bound requirement to act courageously is reflected in citations for professional valor. The person is described as going above and beyond the call of duty. In the case of the ship's captain, his actions seem to reflect instead going beneath and short of the call of duty. But the duty of a cruise ship captain may be a bit different than that of the professions I just described. The physical courage of a transportation officer is only required when something's gone dreadfully wrong. Fortunately, this happens infrequently. Unfortunately, infrequent events are much more difficult to prepare for or even to imagine. Finally, as the public weighs in on the captain's courage or cowardice, one important point that could get lost is what courageous actions he might have taken before the recorded phone call. Our research shows that people overwhelmingly only see courage in others when they have either succeeded in reaching their goal or have clearly given it their all, even to the point of death. An analysis of winners of the American Carnegie Hero Medal found that the award has only been made to would-be rescuers if the victim survives or if the rescuer also dies in the process. As the investigation continues, if it comes to light that the captain did do some things that were at or even above the call of duty, the enduring image may still be one of him cowering in a lifeboat. Our final view of his courage or cowardice may say as much about our own psychological processes as his.
Interesting thoughts from psychology professor Cynthia Puri. Nabila, what do you think of what you've just heard?
Well, I think there have been a lot of comparisons between the Costa Concordia tragedy and that of the Titanic, of course, and I think this is inevitable, especially during the 100th anniversary year of the Titanic going down. But we have to remember that the Titanic captain actually went down on his ship, and he showed immense courage, and so did his crew. And I know it's not a good thing to find anybody guilty before they've had a fair trial, but the situation doesn't look good at all for the captain of the Costa Concordia. He's currently under house arrest, not only because he's accused of causing the actual disaster, but because he tried to escape its consequences by literally running away, and that's not a great sign of courage.
Simon, the point made in that piece which struck me as interesting was the comparison between those who decide to become, for example, a firefighter or a police officer, and therefore almost making that decision implies an element within you that says, I am prepared to be courageous when the need arises. Whereas if you are steering a huge vessel, you hope that that test will never arise.
Yeah, I imagine if you want to become a cruise ship captain, you imagine Love Boat, the famous old TV soap opera where, you know, you sail through sunny weather and you flirt with beautiful female passengers and you have a good time. And apparently he was enjoying a nice bottle of wine with a pretty lady just as a disaster happened. So yes, as a cruise ship captain, you just don't imagine this. And then when it suddenly happens, I can imagine the overriding surprise and shock, and you have a very short time to react in the right way. And he didn't. Whereas if you're a firefighter, this is what you expect, I suppose, all the time. So he was taken by surprise. It bit him in the leg.
Just a thought from you both as well before we move on. Some things have been written about this being a metaphor for the national condition, the problems that Italy faces just now. Is that lazy journalism on our part, or does it have any substance, do you think?
If I could say, I think it's not just the journalists. I think there's a public feeling that this is the metaphor, and Italians are printing T-shirts with the Coast Guard's injunction to the captain, get back on the boat. And the captain is this wonderful metaphor for Italy's political leadership, where, as your psychologist earlier implied, he's worried about his own personal situation rather than valuing the collective. And Italy has had this problem with the weak state, which people try and exploit for their own personal or regional purposes, and not many people do things for the national collective. So yes, it's this ready-made metaphor for the Italian situation.
Yes, I mean, the captain has already been turned into pantomime villain of epic proportions, and I think for all the right reasons, because of the recklessness of how he dealt with the situation. So I think that's a fair comparison.
It's nearly 19 minutes to 8 GMT, as we're going to change the subject. China is famed for its panda diplomacy, where it uses the animals as diplomatic gifts to other countries. And here's an example. First Lady Pat Nixon, wife of the then President Richard Nixon, back in 1972, accepting Ling Ling and Sing Sing on behalf of the American people.
I am pleased to be here and accept the precious gift of the pandas, and also these other mementos from the government of the People's Republic of China. And I do appreciate them taking such good care of the pandas on the long trip and after they arrived here at their new home.
Well, that was 40 years ago. Soon people in France will enjoy the benefits of another such deal. 2 pandas are on their way from their breeding centre in southwestern China to the Loire region of central France, where they'll live in a zoo enclosure, which is apparently adorned with pagodas and marble statues of lions. So what lies behind this deal and deals like it? Henry Nichols is a science journalist, author of The Way of the Panda, The Curious History of China's Political Animal. And he's here. Henry, welcome.
Good morning.
Tell us a little bit more about this deal and how it came about.
Well, there's always highest level diplomatic involvement with these panda deals, which is just extraordinary for an animal alone. So this goes right back, and this deal has been about 5 years in the making. That's typical for these kinds of panda loans. The recent loan to Edinburgh Zoo took a similar length of time. So the negotiations have been going on. The ambassadors in the 2 countries have been checking out the facilities, both in China and in France, and then the deal has to be signed off at the highest level. It was supposed to be announced at the G20 summit last year, but the Euro crisis sort of derailed the pandas, pushed them down the agenda, which was surprising. No,
no, maybe not that surprising.
But then, so they signed it shortly after that, and in fact, the pandas are already there. They flew in last Sunday, so they're not on show yet, but they will be within a week or 2.
How much money changes hands during a deal like this?
The fee is very cagily sort of get the actual details of the loan, but there's this huge contract that accompany a panda loan, and we can be pretty sure the French are paying the standard fee for a pair of pandas, which is $1 million per pair per year, and that's a commitment for usually 10 years. It can be sometimes 5-year commitment to be renewed thereafter. And any cubs that are born, they're the property of China, and they're always recalled after 3 years. All these clauses are stipulated in this incredible document, which I confess I've never seen because they're just so secretive about these things. But
it's quite an investment, isn't it? I mean, what does France get out of this?
Well, I think the zoo has the zoo has an interest. So in the immediate level, it raises gate receipts, it raises reputation. It's a terrific draw. So the zoo will have that. Of course, it's got to make back that vast amount of money, and that isn't always made. That isn't always the case. So only rarely can you make that amount of money. And so usually there's a kind of state involvement, and then you see clearly the much wider symbolism and implications of having pandas in your country. So France more generally will benefit from a closer relationship, a cuddlier, warmer association with China. And of course everybody wants to be friends with China right now. So this is good for the Beauvoir Zoo, which is where they're going to, but it's obviously good for France as well.
We'll talk more about the Chinese side of it in a moment. I just wanted to bring Simon in at this point. I mean, is there much anticipation about the arrival of these pandas, or at least them going on display? Because as Henry says, they're already there, Simon.
Pandas are lovely animals, and I will be there one day to see. But I've just been observing the growing Franco-Chinese links, which are very striking. I went to Chinese New Year. I took my children to Chinese New Year celebrations further up our street last night, only to find I got the week wrong. It's next week. But anyway, Paris has become the largest Chinese city in Europe. The Chinese are buying French wines and cognacs in huge quantities, so this panda deal, I think, should be seen in that context.
Nabila, thoughts on this?
Well, the Chinese government is often and rightly associated with the suppression of basic human rights. So anything involving cuddly animals is bound to get, positive PR. And I think governments will pick on that. And there's nothing controversial about sweet, delightful pandas. And there's no doubt that the Chinese government is also trying to soften its image as well by using those cuddly animals.
Where do they spend the money? China, Henry.
So, there's a history to this. So, which is quite interesting because it ties very closely, maps incredibly closely to China's changing economic status. So, in the 1980s. So originally, with the Nixon loan, you had the clip from there. These were gifts, actual pure gifts, just given.
So that was not a loan.
No,
they stayed where they were.
And China at that point had just opened its doors to the West, and China was on the back foot, and it was China that was wanting to curry favour with and forge these relationships, so they were giving them away. You see a switch in the 1980s where they turned to an explicitly commercial capitalist model, and it was quite ruthless, really, in that they were very short-term loans and for vast amounts of money with no commitment on where the money would be spent in China, and there was quite a lot of corruption and absolutely no benefits to pandas. Now the whole idea was reforged in the late 1990s on a much more ethical footing, so that these loans are long-term breeding loans. You always get a pair. That wasn't always the case before, and the aim of them is to breed. So it's got this conservation, rather persuasive, though not necessarily sound, conservation thing. But so we now have China being able to demand these very large sums, but in exchange for I suppose with the hope that there's a sort of breeding that's going to happen.
Just a final brief thought. The state of the panda in the wild now. Is it still an endangered species officially?
Officially, it is, but this is another moot point because this idea of it being endangered relies on there being fewer than 2,500 adult individuals in the wild. That's the benchmark that the IUCN sets. Now, we just don't know that. The official figure, the last census, which was carried out about 10 years ago, is that there are 1,600 pandas in the wild, but a genetic study in 2006 suggested there could be 2,500 to 3,000. If that's the case, and the panda was no longer actually endangered, I think China would be quite terrified. So, whilst they want to protect the animal and do everything to conserve it, and they're doing quite a lot, they also need it to remain and retain this valuable endangered status.
Henry Nichols, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Very interesting. Let me just remind you of our main stories. A curfew's been imposed in the Nigerian city of Kano after coordinated bomb attacks on police stations and government facilities. And scientists have suspended attempts to modify the bird flu virus for fear that their work might be used by terrorists. Now, here in the UK, pictures by and of the painter David Hocnkey have been everywhere this week. A big exhibition of new landscape paintings opens today at the Royal Academy here in London. At 74, Hocnkey has turned his eye to the countryside of his native Yorkshire in northern England, but he spent much of his career in the United States. Our arts reporter Vincent Dowd has been looking back at Hocnkey's work to before he became the grand old man of British art.
With Lucian Freud gone, David Hocnkey has no rival as Britain's greatest living painter. Interest in his new show at the Royal Academy is huge.
And the idea for this series came to him in late 2009 when he went to New York for an exhibition of his Yorkshire landscapes at Pace Gallery.
Yet for all the Englishness of the new work, Hocnkey has spent half his working life on the American West Coast, coming home only 8 years ago. Standing among his paintings of the East Yorkshire landscape, he says he doesn't miss his old lifestyle.
California has a marvellous light. I mean, that's why Hollywood is there. But East Yorkshire can have a rather wonderful light. I tell my friends in LA, they said, well, when are you coming back? Why are you there? I said, well, I'm on location, as we say in Hollywood.
Christopher Simon Sykes has just published a biography of the young Hocnkey. He says that to a child of gloomy wartime England, 60s California was irresistible.
It initially meant beautiful boys in swimsuits on lovely sunny beaches, and coming from Bradford, you know, and a country where you could still go to prison for being homosexual, it was, you know, very exciting, California.
40 years ago, the public associated Hocnkey not with rolling green fields, but with the brilliant blue of Californian swimming pools. Two of his best-known pieces of the time are Peter Getting Out of Nick's Pool, featuring his then-boyfriend Peter Schlesinger, and A Bigger Splash. That's also the title of a film just re-released, made as Hocnkey and Schlesinger were breaking up. The director was Jack Hazan. Were you aware the handsome boys in a Californian swimming pool had already become an icon?
The swimming pool sequences were iconic as far as David was concerned. They identified him in those years. In fact, people still think of him that way, I believe. That was David Hocnkey. David Hocnkey and Los Angeles, and Los Angeles light and swimming pools. That's David Hocnkey.
In the era of A Bigger Splash, the erotic was vital to Hocnkey's work, as you see in Hazan's film.
There are two swimming pools, and one was in Palm Desert near Palm Springs, one was in Beverly Hills. If the pools look sexy and the boys look sexy, that's deliberate. I mean, what else are you supposed to do? Everything I do is a reflection of David Hocnkey's paintings.
That's what I do. I should go for a cure to California, treat it like a spa.
In the late 70s, David Hocnkey did move to California, and Christopher Simon Sykes is now writing a second book about the quarter century he spent there. Is part of his strength that he's able to look at America as an outsider, so he's painting it as a series of icons, and maybe people like you and me quite like the fact that it's a series of icons?
They are done by an outsider, and they give, and no American could ever paint America like he has. And of course the funny thing is that now, to a lot of Americans, he is the painter who has sort of painted California. When people think of California, they think of David Hocnkey, whether they're American or British.
Who was he painting for?
He only paints for himself. He never paints for other people. It's a very good question, that, but you know, he doesn't take commissions, and he always hated doing commissions. He painted for himself, always.
The film A Bigger Splash and Sykes' new book together reveal a David Hocnkey before he had national treasure status thrust upon him. What each reveals is a man with an obvious sense of fun, but also an absolute focus on making art.
In the life of a great artist, there is only one thing that comes first, and that is their painting. I think anybody who is in either a relationship or a friendship with David Hocnkey knows that to be true, and it's something that goes with the territory, and you just have to understand it.
And it's as true today as it was 40 years ago?
It's as true today as ever, yes. As I know, having known him, got to know him well now, you know, it's just something you come to accept. Your friendship with him is not the most important thing in his life.
Christopher Simon Sykes ending that piece by Vincent Dowd, looking at the work of David Hocnkey, not just now, but in previous years. Nabila, I know you're interested partly because you actually were based in Yorkshire for a while, I think.
Yes, absolutely. It was actually my first time in the UK, where I spent some time in Yorkshire teaching French to young British pupils. So I was very much interested in David Hocnkey's Yorkshire landscapes in particular, which I associate with fondness to my time spent in the UK. And I particularly like the clarity in his work. I think that's something that's very striking, because there's nothing ambiguous or indeed faddish about it, and he works wonders with colours. I also spent some time in California, as it happens, and I think Hocnkey captures very well the essence of American landscapes. This idea that man is indeed dwarfed by nature is very much at the centre of his American landscapes.
I get the sense you might be looking to go to this exhibition at some point.
Absolutely, especially since I missed the exhibition of 2006.
Simon, are you a fan or not?
Absolutely. He's one of those painters whose work makes you happy. The bright colours, the cheer, the image of America at a time when everything was good in America or felt good. Yes, I mean, like Warhol, the sort of bright poppiness of it is delightful.
I don't know whether this entered the thinking of those who are staging the exhibition in London, but it did strike me, having seen so many advertisements for it in recent times if you're walking around London, that the fact that it comes in the middle of January, when everything is a bit grey and drab and often dark, those really bright, vivid colours on those posters somehow make it even more appealing, don't they?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think his use of vibrant colours is what makes his art very upbeat and attractive to me in any case. I like the way he works with, you know, it makes his paintings very dynamic as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those thoughts. And that exhibition, as I say, is in London. It is opening today and it's due to run for, I think, several months, but I don't doubt that tickets will be at something of a premium. Now, stay tuned for the next hour of the World Today weekend if you can, because we'll be hearing the thoughts of one of the Arab world's most highly esteemed poets about the uprising in his home country, Syria.
I would remain a believer in non-violence. I am a supporter of Gandhi against Che Guevara. If you use violence to convince the other side, you have actually defeated your own beliefs.
We will also be discussing if Islamic Sharia law is compatible with human rights and UK law. There's already a lively debate going on the BBC World Service Facebook page, if you're able to access it. Let me just give you a flavour of two comments on either side of that debate which have already come in. Jane Ramsden writes, as far as I'm concerned, Sharia law is wrong. I don't agree with it. It's barbaric and medieval. It shouldn't be tolerated anywhere in the world, especially not here in the UK. We are not a Muslim country. Abdi Jamar says this: get outside your cocoons, away from the hype. Sharia isn't such a big deal. Visit a Muslim and you will see. Do join that debate and listen in after the news. And I know, Nabila, you'll be particularly interested in that discussion. Give us a flavour of where you might stand when our barrister comes in to put forward those points of view.
Well, I think that's something that's... I don't have a problem with Sharia law as long as it's consistent with the law of the land and indeed with human rights values.
And clearly his argument is that it is compatible, certainly in the UK, that you can have Sharia law applying in certain civil situations, and it is compatible with UK law.
It's already the case. There are already courts in the UK which apply Sharia law, especially when it comes to dealing with family issues, but also business relations. And that is the case for other faiths as well, like the Jewish Orthodox courts, which are already active in the UK. So I think it might be a question of whether to apply double standards or not.
Thank you, Nabila. Thank you, Simon, as well. Both of them with me for the next hour of the programme, if you're able to stay with us. And more on that topic and others to come between 8 and 9 o'clock GMT. You're listening to the BBC World Service, and this is The World Today with Julian Warwick.